Hey, what's up? David Cohen here for Learn Now Effects, and welcome back to another exciting Fusion tutorial. Today, we're going to be taking a look at all of the core elements in LensMaster Flares. So let's get started. First thing I'm going to do is grab a background node to add LensMaster Flares to, and I'm going to Control Spacebar or Shift Spacebar, search for LM, LensMaster Flares, and I am going to send this to the viewer. So now I'm going to open the preset builder, and this is where all of the core elements live. We have a glow, we have a multi-iris, we have caustics, we have iris, we have streak, star, soft star, shine, sprite, ring, hoop, anamorphic spot, anamorphic ghost, and of course glass texture. So I'm going to go through them one by one and explain all the different things that you can do with them. So glow looks pretty simple, right? And I'm just going to hide these on-screen widgets. Might look pretty simple. This is what you'd put in the center of your flare because the center is always the brightest. Might look like there isn't much to it. You can change the color. You can change some different things here. You can actually go through and change some stuff in the triggering, and I have another video about how to do that to make it change color when it gets to the center, or make it larger when it gets to the edge, or make it even disappear when it's in the center. Different things that you can do with the triggering. But there are some other things that you can do with this element. Like if I unlock the XY scale, I can actually create a sort of soft streak with this. And I know you already have a streak element, but this is actually a pretty hard element, and this one tends to have a different fall off. It's softer, and I do use it a few times instead of the streak in a lot of the presets. So you can also like rotate this a little bit. You can do some other things. I'm just gonna lock the size again. Another thing you can do is bring up the raise count to create a sort of disco light. This looks pretty cool. You can bring up the depth of the rays to make it look more deep like that. This is actually too much. You can make it go the other way. And also one more thing we have here is the gamma. So you can use this in your backgrounds if you want to make like a glow from the bottom. This is just not enough of a fall off to actually make a glow for the entire screen. So you can go here and bring up the gamma, and that changes the fall off here. And I need to mention that LensMaster Flares process in 16-bit float depth, and you shouldn't be having bandings here. This is just because of the display. And if you do have banding, you would just right click, go to global options and select dither. And that should take care of all of the banding. That's for the view. But when you render, you shouldn't have any banding. And another thing you can do is actually make it parallax. So your light position is here and it will always be opposite the light position. So this goes this way and that'll go that way. That's another cool thing that you can do. You can have like two of them. You can copy and paste. And you would have one of them parallax and the other one not. So one would go this way and the other would go that way. It's a pretty cool thing that you can do with them. It's a nice fall off. Very realistic fall off that we added to these. So I'm going to get rid of the glow and move on to the next element, which is most likely the one with the most controls. This is the multi-iris. So the multi-iris is actually very cool. It has a lot of controls, including chromatic aberration, which we can go nuts with by adding like a lot of it. And it's actually very realistic chromatic aberration, as you can see, because you have the most aberration towards the edge of the screen, and you hardly have any in the middle. And same thing here, we have this linear offset that we can push it forward or backward. And I'm just going to make it go with a light because this doesn't look natural just having a multi-iris without a light. So here's our light. I maybe bring up the raise count to make it look more realistic. And one thing we have about the multi-iris is that it works with sets. So we have 4 available sets. You can enable all 4, but that's actually a little too crowded. I like to leave it at 2, so we would just have 2 and 3 enabled, or you can have 2, 3, and 4, or you can have 2 and 4 to have like really small ones. Depends on what combination you like. And we have the element size, which we can use to bring down the size like this. And I actually on purpose left the opacity too high. It's supposed to be at 3 and the brightness is supposed to be at 1. But I made it so high so that you can see what the shape looks like while you're forming it. And then when you're done forming the shape of the iris, you bring it down. So I'm going to bring that back. And when it's at 3 and 1, it looks most realistic. So another thing you have here, you can change the shape from polygon to circle. You'd have something like this. It becomes smaller, but that's not a problem. We'll just scale it up a little bit, like that. And it has an outline like a real iris element. So you can bring down the softness of the outline, or you can make it like really soft, like that. Something I like to do is to get like the perfect amount of softness, like that, and to give some color to it, and it looks really cool. And when you're working with the circles with such a soft border, you would probably disable most of the sets and leave probably just set 1. You can also make the elements really big and then bring down the opacity, bring down the brightness again, and you would add some color, like make it like a dark blue. That's one thing you can do. And another thing you can do is you can make it anamorphic. And this is something that I should make another video about to go more into depth about. But really what you can do, you can change the translation type. I'm just going to get a new multi-iris to demonstrate with. You can make it anamorphic by changing the polygon size to 4. And I'm just going to bring the opacity back to 3 and 1. And you change the aspect of it. So I'm just going to bring the aspect to something like 0.235. So you get like a nice widened element. And I'm going to change the translation from free to horizontal. So now it moves in an almost anamorphic way. So this isn't an anamorphic flare. So if I want to make the glow anamorphic too, I need to crush the Y size like that. Maybe bring down the number of rays, otherwise it just looks weird. So now we have an element that moves horizontally, but it doesn't move vertically. And also we can do something else. We can make it move vertically but not horizontally. And we have these translation controls on most of the elements, I think. I don't think I added it to all of them because some of them it just isn't relevant, like the hoop, but most of them have it. And I can make it only vertical so that it only moves up and down like that. You have a use for this. I did use this in a couple of presets. And you can also make it custom. And this is something I'm going to talk more about in the actual iris. So there are a lot of features here. You can randomize this like that. You can bring the aspect back to where it was. There are tons of features, tons of things that you can do with the multi-iris to create very interesting looks. I didn't even start talking about the occlusion. You can just bring this down a little bit so that when it gets to the center of the frame, you'd see the whole thing, but when it's far away from the center, it just cuts away like that. That's a cool feature. I don't use it a lot, but it is pretty cool. And what else do we have here? We have the spacing. And another thing we have is the spread. So we bring it down, it just squeezes all these elements together, and I can just push the linear offset forward, and we get this pretty cool element like that. Like this. It's too close together, but you get the point. You can do some pretty interesting things with this. There are a ton of features here, and other than the triggering, we have an entirely separate video about this, the randomization, like the random position. If we bring all of these down, it will just be like the same, as you can see, like copies of it. So that's why we leave it like that. And the random seed we can change, randomize the entire flare. And we have the rotation, the outline thickness, a whole bunch of cool stuff here, like the softness also. Oh, one other thing I didn't even mention is the blade notching. We can bring this up to give it a little bit of notching like that. You use this very minimally. You don't use it a lot. Like you don't want to go overboard with this and make something like super sharp like that. So that should be it for the multi-iris. The next thing we have here is the caustics. And these are pretty straightforward. You use them just when you have these like chromatic aberrations going on in the lens. Say it goes something like this. Change the color, bring it to a blue. You can also change the randomization here and bring up the brightness maybe. You should change the aspect also if you want to make it anamorphic. I can change this to horizontal like that. Bring the aspect to 0.235. And now we have these cool anamorphic elements here. That's nice. And that's basically it for the caustic. There isn't much going on in it. Like you have the rotation, you have different things. You also have triggering. As I mentioned, we have another video about that. And another cool element we have is the iris. So it's like the multi-iris, but there's only one. So if I bring down the roundness to 0 and I bring the opacity also to like something like 3 and 1, this is the default that it's supposed to be. And I want to bring the chromatic aberration to 0 for this one. And I want to bring down the outline intensity for this too. And this is a great example for what I wanted to show you about the custom translation. So I'm going to change the translation from free to custom. And I want to make this thing parallax. So it's going to be on the opposite side of the light. So if I move this around, you'll see, you can hardly see it. Maybe bring up the brightness of this element, just so you can see it. So it's always going to move opposite the light. But we don't want it to move so far away from the light. I want it to stay close. So one thing I can do is I can go to the custom translation and bring the Y translation down to like 20 and X translation maybe to 50. And the aspect, I want to bring it down like that, maybe to 0.235 like that. Now the softness I want to bring to 0.3, and we get this very interesting looking element. It basically stays with our flare and it doesn't go very far away from it, but it is parallax to some degree. And that's one good example of the custom translation. And basically everything else here is the same as the multi-iris, except there's only one. You have the roundness, you can make it round, you can make it into a star, like that. You can turn up the blade notching, you can turn up the softness, a whole bunch of different things that you can do here. It's almost the same as the multi-iris. So the next element we have is the streak, which is also pretty straightforward. We have a streak here, and the glow is kind of getting in the way of the streak. So move it around. This is basically the core of most anamorphic flares. It's pretty simple. And if you want to make it like very soft, I'm gonna bring this like that. Maybe bring the threshold up, and you can hardly see it if you want it to be something very soft. That's something that I use a lot. I bring the threshold up and keep it soft. And there isn't really much going on here. This is the base of your anamorphic flare. And after that, we have a star, which is actually built off of the streak. We have the center glow, which we can turn on and turn off. If you have another glow already and you don't want it to be too bright, you just turn it off. And we can make a different amount of spikes. We can make more spikes. We can make less spikes. We can make the spikes extremely long. We can make them wider. And we have this random angle thing. So if I just randomize this, you can make like a crooked star, make it look natural. I just randomize this to be like completely random. So I just want to bring the randomness up by just a little bit. So you can just keep pressing this button until you find something that you like. And it does look better with more spikes. And you can change the color and do stuff like that. So I'm just going to get rid of this. And I am going to show you the next one, which is a soft star. And this one is very similar to the actual star, except it's a lot softer. It's not as sharp, You can also have more points, but the more points you add, the softer it's going to be. And when you get to like 4 or 3 points, it becomes like really big. And this one's pretty straightforward also. You can also make it parallax. There are a lot of cool things you can do with this one. You would just add this like together with your shine or stuff like that. So now we're gonna look at the shine. And this one is like one of my favorite ones because right off the bat it looks really good. It looks like already a ready flare. So this one you can bring down or bring up the number of rays. You can change the type from sun to spikes. You can bring up the size like that. So you just have like a ball of spikes going on. And you can also bring up the gamma or bring it down like that. Another thing you can do is add atmosphere. So the more atmosphere you add, the more it looks like a fog or something like that. You can bring it to 0, you can bring it all the way to 7. You can actually manually type in a higher number if you want it to be like a really noisy effect, but I think 7 is as far as you'd want to go. And one of the cool features we have here is the auto rotation and the radial masking. So I'm just going to hide these on-screen widgets for a second, and I'm going to move the position of this flare. So I want to bring down the length of this, and as you can see, this actually creates like a spotlight sort of effect. If I turn on auto rotate, it's always going to look at the center, which is pretty cool. You can also turn on triggering to make it change color when it gets to the center, or when it gets closer to the edge to make it get larger, make it get smaller. There are a lot of possibilities you can do with this. I really like this one. It has a lot of cool things you can do. You can change the colors like everywhere else. A lot of possibilities with this one. Now the next thing we have is the sprite, which is something that you add to add a little bit of environment to your flare. I don't use it very often, but it is handy when you create like a fog type looking flare. So if I bring the softness up and bring the size down, it's more looks cooler. It goes good together with the glow. When you bring the gamma up, it goes good together with that. And you have the gamma. You can bring it down to create like a spiky. You can see it very minimally. And you have a fall off, different things, and you have the shimmer, which is something I forgot to talk about in the shine. So this is basically animation of the rays. You can see it if you zoom in, and you can actually make it faster. Yeah, it's too fast. That's the sprite. And the next one we have is the ring, which is also a pretty cool one. You can take the spectrum and make it go the other way around like that. You can bring the gain up. You can add some noise to it, like rays, like this. This actually looks more natural, cool. I think this is good. And you can bring down the size and you bring up the radius, it actually gets thinner. That's something cool that I noticed. And you can also make it parallax. You can bring up or down the thickness. And you can also bring up the atmosphere in this one, bring it up or down. You have the gamma controls that you can bring up or down, like that. You also have the shimmer controls here. And you can also do the radial masking here. I'm just going to bring down the length of this and also turn on auto rotate. So if I add this together with a glow, you'll see that it's always going to be facing on the other side, pointing away from the center, like that, which is pretty cool. You can take away the noise, you can bring down the opacity to make it look like really, bring down the gain to make it look natural, like that. Very subtle. You want to keep things subtle. You don't want to make it look like very obvious. And another cool element we have is the hoop. And with this, I'm going to demonstrate with the glow again and the hoop. And the hoop is also pretty cool. It rotates according to the position of your light. And it also automatically scales according to the position of your light. And you can add rays, you can remove rays, you can make like a lot like this, and then bring down the gain and turn up the softness to make it look natural. I like to bring down the length and then turn up the softness to make it look like that. And you can bring the rays to 0 to get like a solid looking, bring up the softness like that. And it always faces with your light. You can actually add some offset to it with its own angle, but I typically tend to keep it like this. And you also can change the aspect. For when it's an anamorphic flare, you have a hoop that looks like this. So you can change the aspect, and it also automatically changes depending on where you are in the frame. So here it's like narrow and here it's wide. It's like very cool looking, very cool looking element. And you can like bring down the gain to make it also very subtle. Don't want to make it look super obvious. Now, the next element we have is the anamorphic spot, and this is something you'd add like in like for your anamorphic flares, and you typically want to bring the opacity of this down. It doesn't need to be so bright. So you just bring the intensity down to maybe 7. That's very, it looks very dark because in the on a black background, but when it's in a light colored background, you'd see that it's actually pretty, it looks pretty good. And you can also randomize it, like reseed, change everything about it, like to randomize completely. And it also has triggering. You can bring the Y scale down to make it something like this, like even more anamorphic than it already is. You can change the rotation of these elements. You can bring up the count of how many objects there are and distance. And there are a ton of things here to play with, like the height of the elements, also their width, some cool stuff to play with here. And you have the anamorphic ghost, which is almost the same as your anamorphic spot, except there's only one line of elements here. You'd also use this on your anamorphic flares together with the streak or with the glow, also with like the anamorphic caustics to make it look cool. I use this a lot in the anamorphic presets here that you can find in the preset library. Also, the controls are very similar to those of the anamorphic spot. And last but not least, we have the glass texture. And to demonstrate this, I'm going to use a ready preset. So I'm going to browse presets, and I'm going to select, let's see, this one. Even though I already used this preset before in a demonstration, probably should have selected a different one. So when it comes to glass texture, you would just add this here, and you can browse the presets. You can browse the different textures. So I'm just going to choose this texture because it's nice and scratchy. You have like different choices. So this looks interesting. You have these like lens orbs. It looks pretty cool. This one looks nice. They all look pretty good. And depending on which texture you choose, you would decide the threshold and everything like that. And I want to scale this, well, not that much, down like that. And I can view the texture to see what it looks like. And I can also move texture with the flare and offset it a little bit. You have like 10 glass textures to choose from. You have this nifty little glass texture browser. And I want to thank my friend Andrew Hazelden for all his help with the preset builder and the glass preset browser and all of the UI elements you see here in LensMaster Flares. So this is basically all of the core elements that we've been looking at so far. And you can also see that in the existing presets, if you can open them up and see which elements have been used, you can actually find pictures of lens flares online to build your flare off of, or maybe even from films if you can copy the flare using these elements. So I hope you guys like this video. Until next time, I'm David Cohen, and this is Learn Now FX.